In this video, I wanted to share some troubleshooting tips specific to the 2.0 machine. So there are separate videos. For example, there's a whole page on the website for things like dropping stitches or missing stitches and how to repair them. But this is more specific to the machine if something seems to not be working like you expected. First, if you're cranking and the machine jams and it won't turn, do not just force it because you can damage the cams. So instead, be a little bit of a detective and try to figure out what's going on. So first, look down into this cam system, see if you can see where a needle is stuck. You can maybe reach in from here or use your latch tool to get a hold, hook the latch on one of the latches from the needles and pull up and down, check all the needles right in this area. You can adjust the cams. If you lift them up, sometimes that will free up the needle so that it can spin again. Another thing to check if your cylinder won't turn at all is to make sure that this bolt on the side gear hasn't gotten too tight, particularly if you have taken it off yourself. If it's a little too tight, then partway through cranking, it can just decide to seize up completely and you won't be able to turn this at all. So you want to make sure, you can see I've got just a tiny bit of wobble. You want to make sure it's just a little bit loose and then that works just fine. You can try adding lube. So reach down underneath and if you're cranking clockwise, it'll be this flipper cam. So you can actually lift up with one hand and then get your spray lube and put it under the flipper to try to spray in there and see if you can loosen things up. Also check in this area to make sure that there's not yarn caught around or this is trying to split a piece of yarn or something and it's gotten jammed right where it goes under the V-cam. Let's say you're dropping stitches every few rows and you actually think it might be the same needle. You can take one of the stitch markers and mark where that needle is and then go ahead and crank a few more rows. And if it keeps happening at that needle, number one, you might have a broken needle. So we provide spares. Go ahead and just switch it out, see if that solves the problem. You can also check down in the cylinder and see if something has gotten stuck. You can take your pick tool, for example, and kind of run it up and down if something got stuck to unjam it, or even a piece of sandpaper would work. You can fold a piece of sandpaper in half and then run it in the cylinder in case something has gotten jammed in there. If you're losing a bunch of stitches, like it's cranking happily and all of a sudden the stitches sort of like jump off and you have a little section of stitches that didn't knit, almost always that is because your tension is too tight, and there's another whole video on how to manage your tension. Another thing to watch is lots of times your yarn feeder is just not close enough to the needles, and that will cause needles to drop consistently. So that's a thing to check, and the video on loading the yarn shows you how to adjust that and how to position it so that it's close enough to the needles. One quick tip to help prevent a drop stitch: if you notice that a latch has gotten caught and it's starting to ride up on top of the yarn feeder, you'll really want to try to catch that, because otherwise you likely will end up with a dropped stitch. To fix it is very easy. You simply lift up that needle, push the latch so it's flat, and then push the needle back down into place. If you have needles that are just dropping, they're not like caught by the latches, they're just dropping, then your band might be too loose. To check the length of your band, you can take the needles out of your cylinder, take the band off, and then you'll need to start by untwisting it. Find the connection point and untwist it. You probably have to do that several times in order to get it apart. And then you'll notice there's a small end and a flatter end. Put the small end on a ruler at 0. For the Tuttle cylinders, the band should be exactly 10 inches, and for compound, it should be exactly 9. And if you need to shorten it, you can just take a wire cutter and do that. But very important, make sure you cut the wider end. If you cut the small tapered end, you won't be able to use the cylinder anymore. You'll have to buy a new one. So then take the two ends once you're ready, hold them in a loop, but then twist your hands and twist your fingers back, and then put them together and twist forward again to make sure that they're anchored well, and then put it back on your machine and see if that solves the problem with the dropping needles. Worst case, if you have a jam you just can't clear, you might have just take the machine apart. So take the floor gear off, take the needles out, move the VCAM band all the way up to the top. Before you twist, I would go ahead and take out all of these needles so that you're not exacerbating the problem, and then just kind of work in this area back and forth until you can get the cylinder out, and then diagnose what's going on. Another thing to check if you're having trouble with your cylinder is just to make sure that everything is tightened the right amount. Your little flippers should be able to flip up and down. Everything can flip around like it's supposed to. It hasn't gotten too tight. Also, if it gets too loose, it can push into the machine. And a really simple thing to check is just to make sure that your knobs haven't gotten too tight. Haven't gotten too loose. They need to be tightened down so that they're not wiggling. So I hope that helps give you a few things to try. Again, check the website for other troubleshooting tips. And worst case, obviously, feel free to reach out to us and we'll see what we can do to help. Happy knitting! Visit us at deanandbean.com and please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.